Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I'm your host, Brian P. Easton, author of the book series Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. Step inside for a spell. The Werewolf Bar is now open. Happy Halloween to you all, and thanks for joining us tonight for our 2025 Halloween episode. And what an episode we have for you tonight. We always try to make our October offering something special for obvious reasons. And we've got a great show for you this evening to help celebrate spooky season. So let's start things off right with our creature of the night. Now, almost every episode of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter begins with a creature of the night, a whiskey sampling. And for the last few years, we have used the Sexton, a single malt Irish, as our Halloween creature of the night. But this year, we are going to break that tradition, not only because I currently find myself all out of the Sexton, but because I have something else that I need to share with you tonight. This is a bottle of cask strength Willet Straight Rye Whiskey, which was gifted to me from Miles Booth and our friends over at MB Press. Now, maybe you've never heard of this creature before. I hadn't until last week, but it turns out that this particular brand of rye is, especially at cask strength, is kind of highly sought after among people who know their whiskey. It comes from the Willett family, who settled in Kentucky in the late 1700s, and for the first 300 years of their tenure, they made whiskey for other people. Starting in this century, they finally started to put their names on their own bottles. Now, like I said, this is cask strength, which means it comes straight and undiluted from the barrel in which it was aged, making it around 111 proof, which puts it among the heavyweights. It also contains two separate mash bills, which makes me very curious as to what this is going to taste like. So let's open the bottle right now and see what manner of creature we have here. Willet, Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey. With apologies to Irish Gaelic speakers, Ihahona Hanagui. Oh, wow. That is, there's a lot going on there. That is very complex. It's so much smoother than what I would have thought from the alcohol content. This might be the best rye whiskey I've ever tasted. It's remarkable. Just everything about it. I feel kind of out of my league here with this one. I won't lie, because it seems like something whiskey connoisseurs should be describing in terms of spice and herbal and dried fruit notes. This isn't for mixing, I'll tell you that much. And I suddenly feel very aware of how much I don't know about whiskey. Big thank you to Miles and MB Press for sending this one over. And I should tell you the reason why that they sent it over was because I gave them a hand on some cover art for their latest release over at MB Press. It's called The Ghost Papers, Arms in the Dark. Now, this one is a collection of ghost stories, both old and new, just in time for the Halloween season, and available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. Find the link to it down in the description below, along with X and Z's horror movie reviews, which features Miles and his son giving Gen X and Gen Z perspectives on films both old and new. The guys have compiled a triple hitter movie review, especially for our show tonight, of 3 werewolf films that might have fallen under your radar. Where, that's W-E-R, and then The Wolf of Snow Hollow, and Anna and the Wolf. Let's get into it.
Welcome to X and Z Horror Movie Reviews. I am X with your Gen X perspective.
I'm Z with your Gen Z perspective.
And it's Halloween time, so we're back on werewolves.
Indeed.
We are going to do a special triple werewolf movie episode for you tonight. And this is a collection of films that maybe slipped under your radar. Not big budget films by any means. This is all independent cinema, and with varying degrees of things that are interesting, things that maybe are not so great, but each of them has a little something going for it. Now, I will qualify these movies as werewolf movies based on the fact that each one of them uses very obvious werewolf imagery. Doesn't leave anything to the imagination. There's no doubt that some of the images shown are werewolves. Whether or not that turns out to be what you were expecting, that remains to be seen viewer by viewer. All right. We are going to begin with 2013's Were, spelled W-E-R. Clearly, the budget did not exist for a longer name. However, we're going to put the trailer in the comments section, as we will do with all of the films, and what you'll see is a modern day take on what would happen if a werewolf was being investigated by police for murder. It shows things a little bit from the legal side, not fully, not realistically, but a little bit. All right. This movie is brought to us by William Brent Bell, and stars A.J. Cook, Brian Scott O'Connor, Simon Porterman, Vic Sahay, and Sebastian Roche. Now, we begin with a family that's murdered, and savagely. And the police say this must have been done by an animal, but it's also got some premeditated stuff done by a man. And so this guy is arrested. Now, this guy is a moker. Okay, very tall. They did the makeup in such a way that he's very hairy, very hirsute, and he looks like a werewolf would look, right? He's monosyllabic. He's not active. He just kind of sits there in the police station. It's not a bad effect. I don't know that you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I don't care for it
Yeah.
nearly as much. I prefer a little bit more of a crisp quality when it comes to filmmaking, but that's just me. Some people like the found footage style, the aesthetic, and I respect that. But for me, I don't know. I want to see everything in action in 4K. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about that.
All right.
You know,
all right.
the werewolf isn't bad though.
I can take it.
It's not bad.
Well,
it's a real werewolf. I mean,
yeah.
you look at that guy and you're like, nope. No.
You see this guy in the mall and you turn around. You're like,
exactly.
I didn't
It's
bring
like,
my silver bullets.
no.
I'm not messing with that.
No, I'm not messing. No. So, points there.
Yeah.
But the style I wasn't a big fan of. And the story writing, we're not going to go heavy into the story, but it's a bit odd, to put it simply. Like, the ending is a little questionable, in my opinion.
I'll catch everybody up with that real quick. So what happens is he escapes. He does a spectacular multi-cop takedown in an abandoned building construction site. It's got some merit to the setup.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some cool qualities to it, but in the end, it doesn't really, bring everything home. He jumps out of a 48-story window and lands in a superhero Iron Man werewolf crouch. And then they know, like, oh, that guy's a werewolf, and the defense attorney is like, werewolf. But when he wasn't, when he was still pretending like he wasn't a werewolf, he did take a little nip out of one of the other characters' arms, and that guy's been hiding it. Like you do, because whenever you get bit by someone that's supposed to be a werewolf, you're like, shit, I'm not telling anybody about that. I know what they're going to do. Anyhow, this is where the whole movie starts to go downhill because I guess they recapture the guy and then they're transporting him, but he's in a van, a police van, and then all of a sudden it shows the van spinning off the road and wrecking, and now all of a sudden, the werewolf is loose again, but the other guy turns into a werewolf just in time. And this is where it gets weird because in most movies, the werewolf transformation, that is the main thing. That's
meat.
like you got a werewolf movie, let's see that transformation. These are expensive. They're hard to do. We've seen a lot of bad ones, very few good ones. So this movie decided, what we'll do is avoid that entirely. And the guy that's turning into a werewolf, he shaves himself. There, problem solved. So now we have a naked gremlin who's a werewolf that he's going to go fight the other hairy werewolf.
We got the goblin werewolf,
and it's easy to tell which is which. They fight in the dark, but you never lose track. And it gets weird, but of course our hero wins the day. So that's basically the summary of Where. It's an interesting take on the werewolf myth. No one's done another movie quite like it. The effects are questionable. The makeup is minimal, but we do get some, werewolfy looking stuff. It's not the worst werewolf I've ever seen.
Is it the thing that you would imagine? Maybe, maybe not. For me personally, it wasn't. I wasn't expecting just a hulking man, very hairy man, but it's just when I picture a werewolf, I'm thinking of a fantasy werewolf instead of a real werewolf.
Yeah.
But I like what they did here because it was like kind of a fun twist. Like, okay, you know what? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I prefer fantasy.
Okay.
So back to you. Do you like fantasy? Do you like real a little bit more? You said you like the real one a little bit more, right?
I can appreciate both. I'm with you. Like, a big, gnarly looking bipedal werewolf from The Howling. I can dig it. That's probably that's my favorite. But I also dig a little 1941, Lon Chaney, hairy face makeup, just the concept of a guy that doesn't turn into a complete animal. It's supposed to be part human, part wolf.
Right,
so showing qualities of both is also cool. And I do, like I said, I like the idea that this one tried to incorporate a lot of realistic and modern settings.
Right.
So I would say, this is not a terrible watch. I mean, it's not a great watch. It's definitely for werewolf completists. And other than that, kind of obscure, didn't get great ratings, doesn't even show up on some of the sites. Moving on, we have a little bit more well-known movie, but still independent and not all that well-known.
Right, not a AAA thing, not a billion dollar budget, not Marvel.
The Wolf of Snow Hollow. Now, this one's by Jim Cummings. He's got a big fan base, and it was the last movie with Robert Forster. So, and he does his usual great job. It also stars Ricky Lindholm and a bevy of other actors. You enjoyed this one, I know. So
I did indeed.
Tell us all about this movie.
So, Wolf Snow Hollow. Of course, this takes place in Snow Hollow. It's a secluded, snowy town. Not a big population, but it's just a regular town. And is it a new cop? Is he new? That's it, right? New cop in town.
I don't know that
either way.
He's had problems with alcoholism.
Yeah,
maybe he's back on the force.
Something.
Maybe he just got promoted. I don't remember.
Either way,
it's Jim Cummings. He plays the lead role in the movie. He directed it. He wrote it.
The protagonist is a alcoholic cop, and he has an investigation regarding a werewolf attack. And
well, it was an animal attack.
An animal attack, but they say it's a wolf, but it's too big to be a wolf, and it's very foggy as to what actually attacked the victim.
I will say the trailer does a pretty good job of introducing the concept to you. We will also post that in the comments, so you can look that up after you get tired of watching it. Anyhow, please continue.
Anyhow, the movie shows the protagonist investigating the werewolf victim and all the other victims and all this and the investigation. And he is convinced that it is not an animal, but it is in fact a man, when everybody else on the force is like, this is obviously an animal attack.
A beast.
Yes, a beast. And he's like, no, it's not. And so throughout the entire movie, there are more hints and more clues depicting like, okay, this may or may not be a beast. And my favorite part,
Don't give away the ending.
I'm not going to give away the
Okay,
ending,
I'm just saying.
but it is my
it's a
favorite part.
Good twist.
The twist is especially well done, and it is what really kind of just makes me love the movie, all in all, once you get to the twist. And the way they end it, they don't cop out at the end. It's like, okay, I accept that for what it is, and they did a really good job with the werewolf and how they did all of that, and the acting in this movie is not bad. You know, it's questionable
Jim
to some
Cummings is a
degree.
little bit of an overactor,
A little bit.
in my opinion.
And I know I didn't go heavy into like story and analysis, but to be honest with you, it's kind of just an investigation. Like, oh, here's a hint, here's a clue. It's between some characters. He's got a partner, and she, helps contribute to the investigation. And there's just not a lot to get into here. But the way they did the aesthetic and the location, and especially the werewolf itself, is what makes this movie shine for what it is.
Yeah, I will say I agree with that, and the werewolf effects in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
As they turn out to be what they are very well done in a cool
Indeed,
way.
yes.
Yeah, I did dig that. There's a couple of scenes in this movie where I'm like, yes,
No,
nailed it.
there are some winners in there.
Yeah.
There's some questionable scenes too. Like, I'm not entirely sure, what was
budget
necessary.
ran a little dry.
Yeah,
we could have done some editing.
Either way, where it matters, they did put in the effort.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So
no, it's a solid independent film.
It's it's B tier. Like, if you had to rank, all the werewolf movies, it ranks. It's not like, and this is a steaming hot pile of garbage. It's worth watching. If you're a completionist, I think it's worth watching.
It is
But
definitely.
even if you're not,
If you're a completionist,
definitely.
you've probably already seen that one.
perhaps,
I'm going to just go
But-
out on a limb.
like we
And
said,
yes.
it is a little bit more of an under the radar thing. Did it get noticed by Metacritic or any of those?
Yeah, I was just looking at that. So, let's see. It's got 90% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes, on the tomato meter. Popcorn meter 64. So critics loved it. The audience was like, but the audience is notoriously hard to please with werewolf movies. Metacritic gives it a 67 critics and 6.3 on the audience scale. Looks like it's got a 6.2 on IMDb.
So all in all, audience wasn't a huge fan. They liked it, but not, not so much. And
it's tough to do a werewolf movie.
I can see why, but at the end of the day, they did a good job with the werewolves, in my opinion.
They did, and if you don't ask too much of it, it's tough these days because you're like it's a movie, so so is Avengers, Infinity War, and you're like
crazy visuals, over the top action scenes,
so
crazy, Sherlock Holmes detective work, and all that. But it's just like,
it's not fair to compare big budget movies with small budget movies. And then sometimes a small budget movie stands up and rises to the occasion, and this one did, but it's not. You wouldn't have felt good about paying to see it in a theater, I don't think.
No,
but when you're sitting at home,
walk away wanting,
flipping channels, and you're like, oh, here's a werewolf movie. You're like, oh, they did a pretty cool job with that.
Yes. So definitely a good streamer movie. Definitely not worth going to the theater and spending however much money, because drinks are $7.50.
No. You're gonna be $50 into it before you blink. So definitely, that's just for the concessions.
Be considerate. Anyhow, Wolf
All right.
Snow Hollow.
So, and that was a 2020 film. So we had
Yes.
2013,
Semi-modern.
2020, and then what we're going to do is we're going to finish off our trilogy with a movie that was released this year, just a few months ago, actually. And this
In
is
July,
one
right?
that, yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
Yeah, that not many people have seen. There's just not a lot of
There's
talk
not a
about
lot of
this
commotion
one
with this.
at all. But between the movie poster and the imagery used in the trailer, we'll throw in the comments below. Um, there's a very folk horror-esque werewolf in this movie, and it's another independent film. It's got some decent parts. It's got some long parts. It's got some a little heavy-handed with the grim
I
parts.
think the best word to describe all of them would be confusing.
It's well, all right. Definitely confusing and intentionally so. This one's directed by Michael Patrick Jan, and it stars Ethan Embry, and you've seen him before in stuff. Lee Jun Lee, you've seen her before in stuff. Both of these are accomplished actors. Jeremy Harris is also in it, and a handful of other people that make it happen. The acting is competent. The cinematography is competent. It's all good. It looks werewolfy as far as the
You're not
town
looking
it
at the
takes
movie and
place
going,
in.
"That's an indie film."
Right.
Like that's cheap. They did a
Yeah,
good job.
none of these films. Well, no, Where
No.
looks indie film. Snow Hollow looks
I'm
good.
saying no. This movie in
This one,
specific, I'm saying, doesn't look indie. The
Yeah.
other ones maybe, but this one doesn't.
Okay, all right. So this one looks good, but it's a movie. I'm just going to put it on the table. It's a movie about mental illness, and you never know if what you're watching is real or if it's something being imagined until certain things start to give the scene away, and then you realize, oh, this is not actually happening.
Right.
The movie, I will say, begins and ends with the same scene. You immediately will ask, why is that happening? And that's how you start with questions, you end with questions. There's some grim material in between. Uh, and, it's not a fun movie, it's not a happy movie. However, there are the scenes with the werewolf element of this movie that are pretty cool. They're pretty effective. All right. And well, we rated the werewolves before we did the movie, and you liked Where the least.
I liked Where the Least.
Okay, and
I
then
liked.
we didn't really get to which one we liked better, which werewolf was better, Snow Hollow or Alma.
Okay.
They're very different.
Here's the thing. They are very different. If you're going with a classic like beastly werewolf, if you like beastly a little bit more than humanoid, then you're definitely gonna like Snow Hollow a little bit more. That's a lot more of a beast.
Okay, that's true.
Alma and the Wolf, a lot more like that could be a guy in a suit, looking like the aesthetic, because it probably is a guy in a suit in reality, but.
Well, it's definitely a guy.
Well, of course,
in reality,
in real life, not probably it is. If you like beastly, Snow Hollow. If you like more human, Alma.
Alma and the Werewolf features. It's obviously a costume, but it's very effective. And regardless of what it is, because that is in question in the movie, because there's a point at which we meet the werewolf, and at first it's a real wolf, and it's a wolf that they got.
It's a wolf.
It's for the movie.
Yes,
then all of a sudden you turn around, and there's this
bipedal
being standing there in this get up, and you're like, because it's just screaming with crazy, it's effective. You definitely do not want to see that thing coming at you out in the woods. So there's that, and they did just a very good job presenting that as a scary element. I thought so. Other than that, we get a little loose with the writing.
Well, they kind of run with that from like that point onward. That's the roots. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what they run with until the end of the movie. And the visuals, like we said, are effective, but they're the same, and they don't try to evolve. They don't try to evolve anything. Like, let me explain this a little bit better. The story, you cannot piece together what's happening on your own. Not really. Like, without, like, if you didn't know what was going to happen, you wouldn't be able to piece together what, it's not like.
I don't know that you ever do piece it together. I mean, as I sit here right now, because it ended exactly where it began, I couldn't tell you what happened and was real versus what wasn't real. We're dealing with a character who is very much mental, and can I say that on YouTube? We're just running into the troubles. Okay, he's got some sort of confusion going on in his cabeza, and so the entire movie is basically a statement of what a man who is in the middle of a personal breakdown, who has broken down before in his life as a reflection of that, what he's putting in his head is what he would have rather have seen, who he wanted to be versus who he actually is, and kind of fantasies of what he wishes had happened versus the reality of what had happened. And it's a statement about alcoholism. It's a statement about drugs. It's a statement about mental illness. Like I say, it's not a happy film. It's not an inspirational film,
but with some very cool werewolf imagery.
But because we have to see all the werewolf movies, this one has some decent werewolf imagery. Anyhow, and it's not, I mean, there's other like police procedurals that are equally kind of like dark and grim, and there's a whole market for that.
Okay.
It's not like way out there as far as all that stuff goes. You've seen all of this stuff before. They just cobble it together in its own little confusing mishmash of insanity.
No, but throughout the entire movie, you're wondering what is real,
right,
and what is not, and even when they are like, okay, this is what happened, still, you're like, did that happen? Because there's some things that still don't make sense.
Yeah, no,
even in
lot.
reality,
right?
And
either way,
and it's just boggling.
Yeah.
So, all in all, is it a fun watch? Yes, as long as you aren't too disturbed by psychological illness or drug and alcohol consumption,
violence,
and, abuse,
self-violence, abuse, murder.
There's some gritty aspects of the movie that some would find disturbing, I'm sure, but as long as you're in it and you're like, okay, it's a movie, and you're willing to watch it for what it is, and you're accepting of that, it's a fun watch. I found.
Yeah,
it's,
I mean,
it's confusing.
It's not bad.
It makes you think.
Yeah,
it's not just like
it does. This one, out of all three of these films, we watched it. The whole family watched it, and we had more questions about this one than anything I can remember in a long time. To be honest with you.
Yes, they did a good job with that.
Yep.
And you're not like, it's not useless. Like, it's not plot holes. That's
true. It would have to have a plot for there to be plot holes. This is
true.
This is kind of just a
but there are questions that can be answered. Like, it's an overanalyzation kind of movie. Like, watch that 5 more times and see what you missed.
Yep.
There's some things that you can immediately pick up on by the end, like, oh, this is why this was odd in the beginning, which I found like, okay,
you go back, you're like, oh, that's what they're doing.
But I mean, rewatch that and see what happens. And then there's some things like, what even on like days, because they only showed in reality like 2 days, but what about like all
2 or 3 days?
Yeah, like what about all the middle parts, like when he was at the baseball game, for example, and he was under the rafters, like, was he bleachers, was he there, was he the kid, was he like,
that's where
it's questionable, and it's like, I don't know,
that didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
There are definitely some clues and scenes where you're watching, you're like, what are they doing? And you're like, oh, this is
and
not
then his
real.
Relationship with Alma, that is also not real.
Yeah, it turns out to be
It's-
something you're not
And it's
picturing, you're not expecting.
like, what are we even talking about?
I will say this about this film. It doesn't drag. So
no.
you start to see things unfolding, and then you start with the questions in your head, and it moves along at a pace to where you never get bored, and the questions don't get answered, and then you're just kind of building questions and building more questions. They keep the tension nice and tight,
Mm-hmm.
and then it ends, and you're like, oh, what the hell did I just watch? What happened? But it never gets boring or too slow.
And
There's
they don't
a
drag
couple of scenes
questions
where you're
out.
like, they're not quite as effective as moving the story forward, but not bad. I mean, like, it just
Even in the stuff where you go back
know.
and you realize, like, wow, there was no point to that scene whatsoever.
I don't know that's not really a thing in this movie because of what it is.
I don't know. There's some scenes specifically with the police station near the end of the movie that I found to be a little like pointless. I don't know. I'd have to rewatch it to see, but I didn't find it to be.
I think it's just like that was kind of like, you're like, I know I'm not watching something real.
Yeah,
at this point.
okay.
This is not
All
happening.
right. So maybe that was the bridge to tell you, like,
Yeah.
this isn't real.
Right.
And then that is like, so all my questions regarding, all this, now we have the element of what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that was the point of that scene.
That scene, I'll give a little bit of a spoiler away, that ends with a transformation, not into a werewolf, but a weregoat. And the devil plays a role in the symbolism in this movie, and there are some definite folk horror scenes it involves two goats as well as a wolf. It gets
Three.
freaky.
We only
three goats.
It's three,
Okay.
and
That's
they
two.
only show two.
Okay. Oh.
She said three though.
All right,
She
and
said
that's
there's
probably
three goats.
another clue.
So there's a lot to
yeah.
piece together with this one.
There was a
obviously
disturbing bonfire scene where there's some questionable
yeah, there's some
interpretive
dancing.
dancing. You're like,
I'm not.
where are we going with this?
I'm not sure.
But it all kind of sorts itself out, I guess, by the end.
At the end of the movie, you're left confused, bewildered, and with questions.
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
well,
so
with that,
that's 3 more werewolf movies you probably haven't seen, but
unlikely.
Now you can view the trailers below, and if you like the look of it, check it out. All right, we are going to have more Halloween reviews coming up. We're going to try to catch up on some things that we've seen a lot of movies. We've watched a lot of movies to review. Time being what it is, we haven't had chances to record as often as we would like, but we're going to try to catch up with some things during October.
Indeed, and if there's any Halloween movies that you guys like, let us know. Maybe we'll review
those.
Throw
in the comments. Absolutely. We can tell you if that's on the list, or if we can,
add to the list.
Get it in the mix.
So, with that being said, I'm Z with your Gen Z perspective.
And I'm X with your Gen X perspective. And as always, we thank you for watching.
Do you know that for a period of over 100 years, there were actual recorded werewolf sightings about every day and a half?
When are you talking about? The Dark Ages?
No, look, these are newspaper headlines from the 70s and the 80s. Suicide youth feared he was werewolf. Werewolf man taken to secret prison. Werewolf attacks student nurse. Police capture killer werewolf.
And those are all recent.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, you'll probably never see a werewolf.
What do you mean, probably?
It says here, you never see them coming.
That's great, fellas. Of those 3, I had only seen The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which initially disappointed me, but in hindsight was pretty original nonetheless. So I was looking forward to what X and Z might have to say about these other 2. Of those, after watching these reviews along with you, I believe Alma and the Wolf piques my curiosity the most, not only because I'd never heard of it before, but because the storytelling method X and Z described there sounds fascinating as a way to make a movie. So I'll be checking that out for sure. Thanks again, guys, for letting us share your thoughts with our audience and for bringing over the bottle to us. And to the audience, like I said, be sure to head over to X and Z's YouTube channel. When you're done here, you can watch all of their horror movie reviews. And on the subject of movies, I thought it might be appropriate tonight for us to look at a couple of upcoming films, which are the latest iterations of the most famous literary horrors of all time, Frankenstein and Dracula. First, in November, Netflix is going to be bringing its subscribers Guillermo del Toro's long-anticipated vision of Frankenstein, starring Oscar Isaac as the Good Doctor, Mia Goth, Jacob Elordi, and Oscar winner Christoph Waltz. Let's take a look at the trailer for this thing.
I had determined that the memory of my evils should die with me. Some of what I will tell you is fact. Some is not. But it is all true. What manner of creature is that? What manner of devil made him? I did. I had a vision. An idea took shape in my mind. Inevitable. Unavoidable. Until it became truth. In seeking life, I created death.
It looks good to me. And I've been waiting for Del Toro to get his hands on this, his passion project, for some time. And in the new year, sometime in the first quarter of 2026, we're told, Luc Besson's Dracula, A Love's Tale comes to America. It's a French piece done in English, and it debuted in France back in July. Judging by this trailer, it seems to be as heavily inspired by Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula as it does Stoker's immortal novel. Let's take a look at the preview.
Tell me your story.
My story. Well, 100 years ago, I asked a priest that God spare my wife. He did not. Tell your God, my life no longer belongs to him. Since then, I've lived on, waiting for her return.
My master.
He's been looking for his beloved for more than 400 years.
He comes to find his princess.
This man is the devil. Mina's in danger. Repent for your salvation. She is my salvation. But you are her damnation.
So that was Caleb Landry Jones as Count Dracula with Zoe Blue, Matilda de Angelis, and once again, Christoph Waltz in the role of Abraham Van Helsing. Perfect. And as much as we're about werewolves here, the Dracula story and its many interpretations and many forays into film never ceased to get my attention. Looking forward to both of these movies. Moving on now from the cinema to the field, where Tex Grebner routinely shows us the many tools in the Monster Hunter's kit. And that's one of the things this show was founded on, monster hunting in general, werewolf hunting in particular. So let's roll up our sleeves, because monster hunting is a bloody trade, and watch Tex Grebner and his latest edition of Tools of the Trade.
Welcome to Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I am Tex Grebner, and on this episode we're going to be talking about paradox guns and the power of silver slugs versus silver shot. I hope you guys are going to enjoy watching.
I have a couple elephant guns, and both are Mauser magazine style rifles. Now, I always wanted a double rifle, but I can't afford a double rifle. However, what I can afford is to create a paradox gun. A paradox gun has express style sights, essentially smooth bores, and will shoot birdshot, buckshot, round ball, and slug equally well out of both barrels out to 50 yards. And a lot of times when we think of the shotgun, everybody loads silver rosary beads or silver filings or so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, all it takes to create very viable silver conical ammunition for a 20 gauge, 20 bore, 12 bore, 10 bore in a paradox style is to take a spot silver bullion round, meaning a round spot of silver, hammer it through a swedging die, and because of the shotgun's lower velocity and impact force, it will perform devastatingly out to 50 yards.
It's late at night. You're safe and warm in bed. You're watching TV. You're alone. You hear a strange noise. The cat? The dog? The wind? How do you know it's not a werewolf?
For my dust-up, Tex wanted me to mention that the paradox gun, or as is also known, the ball and shotgun, was an essential big game hunting tool before the advent of smokeless powder and the nitro round. specifically during the European colonial period in Africa and India. And the sort of slug Tex was talking about was actually used against the Tsavo man-eaters in 1898 in Kenya, which, if you don't know, the Tsavo man-eaters refers to the pair of rogue lions, sometimes called The Ghost and the Darkness, from the film, which was a fictionalized account of the events. The Paradox gun also appears to be a favorite of Sir Talbot, as played by Anthony Hopkins in the 2010 remake of The Wolfman. And Tex is right on when he says that a swaged silver slug is plenty accurate from a smooth bore at 50 yards. I love those big old double-barreled rifles from yesteryear. And the only version of one in my book series that I can think of was the Howdah pistol, as used against the wolf, the she-wolf, Rowena Robin, or Robin Redbreast, in the lineage. That weapon was a 5.77 Snider rifle that had been cut down into a Howdah pistol, which were intended as a last-ditch line of defense against dangerous game while hunting from the back of an elephant on a canopied platform or seat called a howdah. Many thanks to Tex for taking the time and the effort to bring that to us. It's always good to have him here on the show. So as I've been telling you over the last many months, author, composer, musician Tom Brannan has been at work creating a soundtrack for each of the 3 novels in the original trilogy. These are unique soundtracks for the first 3 books, and we've shared a few of those tracks with you here on the show. And tonight we're going to bring you his version of the song from the first book that was played on a phonograph while Sylvester lies in wait for the Louisville wolf, who mistakes him for someone else altogether as it busts through the front door of a suburban home. Set to Tom's own version of Grieg's In the Hall of the Mountain King is the animation skeleton dance, newly introduced into the public domain. Here's our timbre. Tom. That was very cool and nicely synced together. Tom also did an album called Welcome to the Strangerhood that is comprised of songs inspired by book titles from Permuted Press's library, who are my publishers. That album is now on Spotify, and on it, we have a song, Autobiography of a Werewolf. It makes that list for Tom, and it has a song on it, track number 9, The Abyss Gazes Back, based on the quote by Nietzsche that opens the first book. I've included the link to the album itself down in the description, so head on over there and give a listen to Tom's tributes to some of his favorite Permuted Press titles, including my own, when you're done here, of course. We're very glad to have Dr. T. Broussard back with us for this Halloween episode. For the benefit of those who might just be joining us, Dr. T is an authority on the occult arts and sciences. And for the last few years, he's been heading up a segment called Doc Talk Shop, which is an occult primer series. And he has presented a variety of subjects as related to supernatural events that take place in my book series. Most recently, Doc has been sharing a new limited series about historical and factual werewolves, which began with the infamous Beast of Gévaudan, and tonight he's here to present what might be the most famous historical werewolf of all time, that being the Werewolf of Bedburg, Peter Stube, or Stubb. Here's Doc Talk Shop with the werewolves who were.
Hello and welcome to Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. And this is Doc Talk Shop. After a long unintended hiatus. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about one of the most famous werewolves in history. An account that laid the groundwork for much of what we take as gospel, no pun intended, for werewolves. At least until the age of science and fiction. Tonight, I'm talking about the one, the only, thankfully, Peter Stube. Peter Stube was an older man in Bedburg, Germany. He was, depending on the account, either very destitute or wealthy. The court documents are in fact unclear on that subject, which could say something about the courts at the time. But in either case, he was a loner, and in a time when loners and their families did not eat well, he managed to eat well. He managed to thrive when those around him did not. While he was in residence, so to speak, in Bitburg, killings began and continued for a long time. Children, women, even Stube's own son, they were apparently killed by an animal. And few witnesses reported seeing an animal. They didn't see a man, they saw a wolf or a wolf-like man. They were very clear about that. Now, Peter Stube was unusual for lots of reasons. He was an occultist, possibly a pagan, in a time when even a hint of such could get you killed. He lived with at least 2 women in an adult manner, one of which may have been, at the very least, his stepdaughter. So again, this very unusual individual. Right? So it was revealed that Peter Stube was in fact a werewolf. And after being interrogated by the ecclesiastical and legal authorities, aka tortured, he confessed to being initiated as a young teen into black arts, making a pact with the Lord of the Woods, with the Forest Lord, as a younger man, gaining a wolf pelt, and becoming a werewolf in the process. Now, it's interesting that the court records refer to Stube as both a flesh eater and a blood sucker. You know, this idea that lycanthropes and vampires were so distinct and so disconnected is a relatively new idea that belongs to fiction and to media, not much to folklore. In fact, in some accounts, the werewolf in life rises as the vampire after death. Make of that what you will. Now, Stube was tried and convicted on October 28th of 1589 in Bedbury, Germany. And on October 31st of that same year, he was executed. Now, this was before Halloween was a thing, but the significance of the date, the timing, and so forth is rather significant because it creates a resonance between what we think of as Halloween and the mythos of the werewolf. It also points back to the likelihood that if his rituals actually occurred the way he described, he would have become a werewolf starting on August 1st, way back when he was a teen, which could be the origin of the whole autumn moon is bright thing in Carl Sandnick's poem that he wrote for the Wolfman. Stube was, by all accounts, unrepentant and was very likely what we would now consider a psychotic killer. Now, there is the hint of a man desperate to survive, finding a way to survive. And it should be noted that both his wife, mistress, and daughter, possible mistress, were killed alongside him. They were burned while he was beheaded, skinned, and eventually burned. Now, much like Ryan P. Easton described in his fiction, the sign of the wheel with the slots of wood originates from after the killing or the execution of Stube. They took his head and, depending on the account, paired it with a wolf's head and put it on a wheel with pieces of wood representing his victims. And if that tradition was carried on, if Subei's tradition was to be carried on, I can see how that would become a sigilized fetish object. You know, the whole wheel with the slats and so forth. Peter Subei, at worst, was a werewolf. At best, was a psychotic and a deviant. So obviously, nothing to imitate or venerate. But, however, Subei does represent a constellation of many factors that have contributed to art, fiction, even music. Recently, the band Powerwolf released a song called 1589. It was all about the case of Subei and how he was both predator and victim. So you could say in his case, the wolf fell to the bear of Rome, a form of the death bear, if you will. With that being said, after a long hiatus, I will say good hunting, and as always, mind the moon.
Doc says Stube. I've heard stub, stumpf, and stube. Can't seem to get a straight answer on the exact pronunciation. But in any event, my fictionalized version of Peter, or Pietro as he's called in the second book, features prominently into Heart of Scars, which is the second book of the series. And he is the primary adversary in that book. In my story, and in line with my mythos, the judges of Bedburg can't simply skin or behead or burn an actual werewolf, as is the case in the historical trial and execution of Peter Stubb. So what Peter does, instead of simply withstanding these punishments, is he substitutes a patsy who is beaten beyond reasonable recognition, allegedly by villagers who have lost loved ones to him after his arrest. So 2 days later, the execution, the judges believe they are dispensing righteous judgment on a killer werewolf, unaware that they've really been duped and have gotten the wrong man, and that by design. There's a lot more to the story than that, and you can read it in Heart of Scars. But like Doc mentioned, the wheel with the dangling sticks and the likeness of a wolf at the top of it becomes the sigil or symbol of Peter's own cult, if you will. And in the book, it's in the form of the Jabberwocky, or as it's more officially known, La Vajoie. Can't pronounce French, I'm sorry. But like I said, you can read all about that in the Heart of Scars book. I'm very fond of taking artistic licenses with traditional werewolves, historical werewolf tales, or trials or different elements. And I like to weave them into my stories so that the events and the people that you're reading about might hit a little closer to home than something simply conjured from thin air. Oh, I do that too, of course. But if I can suspend disbelief just a little bit, then that's what I want to do. We appreciate Dr. Broussard's contributions this evening. And as always, we want to thank him for his time and expertise. Thank you, sir. Well, as we wind down this year's Halloween episode, I want to close with what's become a kind of tradition over the last 3 years or so, and play for you the Reverend Matthew Bowles' presentation on the history of Halloween. If this isn't your first Halloween with us, then you probably know Matthew has been my editor for many moons, both on my first 3 novels and now the Winter Fox Journals. And I replay this piece every year because I think there's a lot of things about Halloween that we tend to skip over. I mean, we know that Halloween is a time for monsters and candy and bonfires. It's spooky season. We also know it is Samhain, with origins in pagan Ireland and the Celtic festival that marked the end of harvest and the start of winter, when the veil between the realms of living and dead are most permeable. But what about all the intervening years between Druids and decorations? There's a lot of evolution to this day, this All Hallows Eve. So please sit back and relax as we revisit Discovering Halloween with Matthew Bow.
Hello. Brian asked me to talk a little about what Halloween is and where it comes from. What it is fairly simple. If you live in North America, you've likely experienced it. There are the decorations, the sales, the movie marathons, the trick-or-treating, the parties, and the thrill and the experience of dressing up as someone else, the delicious, spooky feeling of the season. It is many people's favorite holiday. But where does it come from? Where do all the ghosts and cobwebs and werewolves and other things that go bump in the night, where do they fit into this beloved holiday? Well, the answer is fairly complicated because there are a lot of things, a lot of elements that go into Halloween, and they come from a number of places. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to try to work my way through one at a time, and then you can judge for yourself where Halloween comes from. First, let's take the name. That one is fairly straightforward. Halloween, the word, has a distinctly Christian origin. Halloween is from the Middle English, and it's a contraction of All Hallows Even, or All Hallows In, and it translates into modern English as the eve of All Hallows Day or All Saints Day, which is a Christian celebration that goes back until back as far as the 400s AD. As for the date of October 31st, that one's a little trickier. It kind of comes from a very old Celtic festival that is known in Ireland and Scotland as Samhain. If that name isn't familiar to you, it's probably because, like me, you've seen it written and not heard it said. And I've, for years and years and years, thought it was Samhain. In fact, the real Ghostbusters cartoon told me it was Samhain, and I thought they were an unimpeachable source. So, wisdom came late in life to me. Well, Samhain is a festival. It's one of 4 Celtic festivals that occur annually, and it was the one that represented the beginning of the season of winter. And it came around November 1st, but one thing to realize is that the ancient Celtic peoples didn't use the Julian calendar. They didn't use the calendar that we have, which is a solar calendar. They used a lunar calendar, and the cycles of the lunar calendar and the solar calendar don't line up terribly well. And so holidays that come off the lunar calendar, they tend to bounce around a lot. So according to our calendar, Samhain could have been anywhere from mid-October to mid-November, but it was around November 1st. And when the Julian calendar was finally accepted in Ireland and Scotland, and I was not able to find when exactly that was, but they standardized Samhain to November 1st. Now that's a likely explanation, because the Christian tradition of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, they had not been fixed to a single date for a long period of time. The All Saints' Day, when it started out, and it started fairly early, it started in the 3rd or 4th century AD, it was a day to remember all those people who in the previous year had died for the sake of their faith, in other words, the martyrs. All Saints' Day was celebrated in some places the Sunday after Easter, in some places the Sunday after Pentecost. So, and it was mostly a spring or summer day of prayer and devotion to those who had died. All Souls' Day, similarly, was sometime in the Easter season. It wasn't for some time until those became standardized. And they became standardized, and this really kind of took effect mostly in the Mediterranean areas, the parts that had been very much the old Roman Empire. And this came about in 609 or 610, when Pope Boniface IV said that All Saints' Day was May 13th, which is not, we don't know exactly why. The presenting argument is that was to celebrate the commemoration of an old Roman pagan temple. It was reconsecrated as a Christian church. There's some speculation that it might have been to coincide with a Roman pagan festival called Lemuria, which is the day that the head of the household has to appease the spirits of the dead, or else they'll be around the house creating mischief for the next year. And so he has to get up early and put on his clothing backwards and march backwards through the house chanting and throwing beans over his shoulder. The idea is that the ghosts, which were called lemurs or larvae, will eat the beans and be satisfied and go back down to the underworld. Or if they're not satisfied, then the whole household can get up and rattle pots and pans and make as much noise as possible. See, ghosts like beans, but they hate noise. It wasn't until sometime later, and we don't know again exactly the reasons. There are a couple of reasons given in Christian records that have to do with the dedication of a church or a special conference that was held. But Pope Gregory III, in either 731 or 741, you can see how shaky the records are there, declared that All Saints' Day would be November 1st. And at that point, it seems to have synced up with Samhain. Whether that was to try to get rid of the vestiges of pagan religion in Ireland and Scotland is a matter of scholarly debate. James Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough, thought it definitely was. Several others who've come along since have argued that no, it was not. That and when you look at the calendar, Ireland had become Christian in the early 5th century, and so Samhain had basically been around in the British Isles under Christianity for 300 years before this happened. It seems like they would have tried, if they'd been very concerned about repressing it, they might have tried sooner. So it might be, it might not be. It's a shame we don't have the evidence to say for certain, but at this distance, all we can really do is speculate. Now, one of the first things you think of when you think of Halloween are ghosts. And the spirits of the dead are there in everything that came before. They're there in the Roman festival of Lemuria. They're there in the Christian All Saints' Day. They're there in the Christian All Souls' Day. And it looks like they're there in Samhain. There are two epic poems that come from Ireland in the 7th century. One is called the Tain Bokulain, which was the Coolies cattle raid, and the other are the Boyhood Deeds of Finn. And in both of them, Samhain is mentioned, and Samhain is mentioned at a time when the fairy mounds, there are these large earthen mounds. They're very, very old burial mounds that you find, especially in Ireland, and they're associated with both the land of the dead and the land of the fairies. And there are certain times of day and there are certain times of year, and Samhain seems to be one of these, when the barriers between the world of the living and the world of the dead grow very thin, and the dead can come out and mingle with the living. So the idea of ghosts being connected to Samhain and that passing on somehow to Halloween seems to be a very logical assumption. So what was ancient Samhain like? Well, it was a day when you would end the day with a grand feast. Before that, there was often harvesting in the fields to be done. Now, there is an Irish figure called the Cailleach, which I'm probably not pronouncing quite right, but she was an old woman, and she probably at one point had been a weather goddess. She was believed at this time of year to turn into a hare, and the farmers, as they were harvesting their fields, and when they came to the end of one field, they'd raise a great shout to try to drive the hare off into the next field, because if you got the Cailleach to go from field to field, you would have a good harvest. We don't know much more about the celebration than this. We do, as I said, have the record of the idea of ghosts appearing at Samhain. And there's some thought that maybe the ghosts of dear departed ones would come and join you at the feast as your guests, while the ghosts of those who had been murdered might be lurking around that evening for a chance at revenge. In any case, ghosts are something that go far, far back in both or at least spirits of the dead are something that go far, far back in both the Celtic and the Christian tradition. What about skeletons? Well, skeletons show up more on the Christian side than the Celtic. Skeletons, as a part of the remembrance of the dead, go back to a tradition called memento mori. It's not clear whether this decision started among Jews and Christians or started among Greek and Roman philosophers, but it's certainly something that permeated late Roman and early European society. And the idea was you would take something, a skeleton or a skull, and you would say to another person, memento mori, which means remember that you are mortal. This took a much more specific form in the 14th century. That's the year when we got the Black Plague, killing off just about a third of the population of Europe. And so death became a terrible, omnipresent reality in a way that modern people have not experienced it. And one of the ways they coped is they saw kind of a positive side to this, and you would see pictures drawn that are called the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of the Dead. And in these pictures, you'll have rings of people dancing hand in hand. Some of the people will be living, and some of the people will be skeletons. All of the people, real and skeletons, will be dressed in various costumes. They'll look like soldiers, they'll look like nobles, they'll look like peasants, they'll look like knights, they'll look like clergy. And the message of the Danse Macabre is very simple. Death is the great equalizer. When it comes to death, all people, no matter what their status, no matter what their education, no matter what their wealth, no matter what their power in this world, are all reduced to complete equality. This is something that you can see very strongly in the skeleton decorations, and it takes on an even more special form in Mexico. In Mexico and in other places where Mexicans have immigrated, we have Los Dias de los Muertos, the Days of the Dead. Those cover Halloween, they cover All Saints' Day, they cover All Souls' Day, and the costumes, which focus on skeletons, and the candy, which is little sugar cubes which have been shaped into skulls, are just amazing to look at. Dia de los Muertos is, it's different. Halloween tends to have kind of a spooky tone or a somber tone. Dias de los Muertos is pure celebration and fun. There's been recently some discussion that Dias de los Muertos might owe as much or more to the indigenous religions of Mexico, from the Aztecs and the Mayas, than it does to Christianity. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any documentation on that. One of the problems with trying to look at old Mexican traditions is we don't have any written records until we get the conquistadores and the priests who, it wasn't always in their, in what they assumed were their interests to record things accurately. So that, the possible indigenous origins of Dia de los Muertos, we'll have to look forward to the developing scholarship on that. So we've dealt with ghosts and skeletons, and that leaves us with a number of other creatures of the night. There's the bat, and bats have often been seen as kind of unnatural because they fly like birds, but they have no feathers, and they only come out at night, and they're just kind of weird as far as the average person who goes looking at them says. And there's one other thing. There's a legend of evil spirits who drink blood. This goes back in Europe to classical Greek times. Sergius and Lemures and Vardalax, or to use the most common word, vampires. In the 1600s, Spanish and Portuguese explorers in the New World discovered a kind of bat that, instead of eating fruit or meat, well, actually it did eat fruit, they just didn't realize that, but it subsisted largely off of drinking the blood of animals. And if you read some of the accounts of the conquistadores, you would guess that cattle and sheep and llamas and other livestock were drained of their blood and left for dead by tiny creatures about that big. Actually, vampires make a very nice, distinct cut with their very sharp teeth, and they lap up the little bit of blood that flows and leave the animal pretty much unharmed and maybe even unaware that it's been fed on. But the discovery of a blood-drinking animal captured their imaginations and became linked to these legends. I think the first time it is explicitly linked, and the first time vampires become popular enough that people start dressing at them as Halloween, has to do with the publication of a 19th century novel by Bram Stoker called Dracula. Similarly, while the werewolf myth has also been around to classical Greek times, werewolves weren't a terribly popular monster, not until 1941, when Universal Studios released a movie called The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., which really made the werewolf a popular and entertaining monster in a popular costume as well. Trick or treat is one of those that it's hard to figure out when that started. There is a tradition, an old tradition, although we don't know how old, because we can only trace it back to about the 1600s in Scotland and Ireland. It's called guising or souling, And the idea is that you put on a costume, and the old costumes were very simple. You basically made yourself look like a human scarecrow, and you would go from house to house. Children would often perform. They would recite memorized poems or memorize verses of scripture in return for candy or something called a soul cake, which was baked in Christian households and given out, or possibly even money. At some point, the tradition came that if people didn't give you your treat, you gave them a trick. This came over with waves of migrants to the Americas, and the trick part in this country, in Canada and in the United States, became very popular. And there were lots of things like porch doors and gates and wagon wheels that were stolen, removed from the homes and left on Main Street by pranksters. So the treat part is fairly modern, and the trick part is also responsible for the creation of haunted houses. Haunted houses began in the Great Depression as a way to keep trick-or-treaters off the streets. It was supposed to be a safe, fun, family-friendly way of celebrating. And so you had, very much as you have today, houses with elaborate decorations, actors in costumes, and you get a good, nice, thrilling scare as you go through them. They started simply. They still exist. These days, there are haunted hospitals, haunted prisons, all kinds of variety and often Hollywood quality makeup and special effects. This inspired what I consider to be the strangest and in some ways most disturbing Halloween innovation of all, which was the Hell House in the 1970s, inspired by Jack Chick books. Jack Chick was a cartoonist who wrote a number of Christian comic books, one of which detailed all the sins of Halloween, which was the birthday of the devil, and was a time when pagan people would kidnap children to use them for human sacrifice and all sorts of other nonsense like that. Motivated by the threat of Halloween, some conservative churches across the country, across the United States and Canada, began hosting what they called hell houses. And the name kind of suggests what these were. They were an alternative to a haunted house where you would go in and you would see actors and you'd see sets decorated, and the sets would, there would be sort of a two-part tableau. The first part, you would go in and you would see young people who were obviously considering alcohol or drugs or premarital sex or an abortion or becoming homosexual or various other things like that. You'd move on to the next room and you get a picture of those same young people now suffering the torments of hell, where haunted houses were meant to give you a delicious thrill of fear. These were meant to give you a traumatic sort of fear that would hopefully frighten you into a more righteous way of living than the theoretically depraved sort of life that you might have been living beforehand. They're still around, I'm sorry to say. I hope there's some legitimate value to them that someone has found, but of course, in the latter part of the 20th century, costumes have really costumes, decorations, animatronics have all taken on a life of their own as sophisticated commercial costumes and makeup have become available. And these days, you can, with a little money, you can make yourself up as anything from one of the Walking Dead to a werewolf to a superhero to a fairy princess to so many other things. As I mentioned before, there's a kind of fun that comes, a kind of release that comes when you put together an identity that's not who you usually or really are. There's a kind of freedom that seems to come with that. So, what are the origins of Halloween? Well, there are some Christian elements. There are some pagan elements, especially Celtic elements, but also Roman and South European and Irish. There are also secular elements, especially commercial elements. So, what's the origin of Halloween? I'm not sure we can say it has one, but as we celebrate it with its many diverse origins, I hope all of you do so safely and have a lot of fun.
I hope you enjoy that as much as I do. And of course, special thanks to Matthew and all our contributors who made this Halloween episode happen. We couldn't do it without you. And I want to thank you for coming by this night and spending a little time with us for the season. And if I might quote Sylvester from the first book, "Autumn is a fleeting season, melancholy by nature. Its ghostly beauty cultivates a fertile atmosphere for memories that wrote their history in a tablet of fallen leaves. I recall them with the greatest clarity. Whatever else autumn may be, it is the prophet of winter. Winter lasts forever." Be sure to check out the links in the description below, especially Brandon's Welcome to the Strangerhood and X and Z's horror movie reviews. If you're so inclined, we'd be glad for you to like and subscribe as you leave the Werewolf Bar tonight, and stop by werewolfhunter.com sometime. You might be surprised what you find there. Until we get together next month, let me wish you one more time a very happy Halloween, a happy hunting, and mind the moon.
Don't turn around. There may be something behind you.